Well, welcome to BGO Blind Pig, a special edition solo style. I'm going to be doing another opposing delicacy presentation. Opposing delicacies, that's where we go to opponents, road cities, and we look at what are the iconic dishes or foods that that city is famous for. I know being that we're playing in Philadelphia, everyone's going to say cheesesteak, cheesesteak, but I chose not to do cheesesteak just because screw Philadelphia. But we'll get to the preparation of our iconic Philadelphia dish in just a minute. I just wanted to mention, if you're new to BGO Blind Pig, we are the official podcast of bgobsession.com, home to your burgundy and gold obsession since 2009. We are present on pretty much every social media site. We've got a big presence on X. We've got a Facebook group. We're on Instagram, and recently we stuck our toe in the water over on Blue Wave. So come check us out. But most importantly, we have the best fan forum on the planet for Washington Redskins / Washington football team / Washington Commanders fans, and we just have a super friendly community. All kinds of fun contests. Super discussions. We have a infamous game chat every Sunday, a live game chat, or every in this case Sunday at 3:00. We'll be having our game chat on BGO, and all you have to do is come to bgobsession.com, register. Everything on our site is free. Amazing crowd of people. You cannot beat it if you're a Washington football fan. Come check us out. So opposing delicacies again. We're traveling to Philadelphia for the biggest game, and I can't remember when. And you know, it's hard to believe I'm even saying that. As I was titling this podcast, I was like, NFC Championship Edition. Wow. I mean, that is hard to wrap your mind around. But today we're not going to talk about football so much. We're going to talk about what foods is Philadelphia famous for. At our road game earlier in the year, I did two other iconic Philadelphia dishes, which were tomato pie and scrapple, and those were both really good. But if I'm not going to do Philly cheesesteak, what on earth could I possibly be cooking today? Well, I went with what in some people will say is actually the better sandwich, which is called a Philadelphia roast pork sandwich. I'm going to give you a little bit of history, and I'll confess to you, I'm reading this right off of the Serious Eats website. Serious Eats is a great website. But just to give you a little bit of history, the roast pork sandwich has roots in the cuisine of the Abruzzo region of Italy, whose people immigrated en masse to Philadelphia back in the early 20th century, setting up primarily in South Philly. Domenico Bucci set up the first roast pork shop in Philly back in 1930. So the Philadelphia roast pork sandwich has been around a while. The shop is now called John's Roast Pork and is still there and one of the most popular sandwich shops in the area. So, you know, again, cheesesteaks are great, but this dish takes some effort and time to prepare. I spent the better part of the day getting this stuff ready. So let's talk about what actually is a Philadelphia roast pork sandwich. Well, obviously, it's a roast pork sandwich. It's got melted provolone. It's got braised roast pork or braised pork, even though it's called a roast pork sandwich. And it's with a really great au juice. And then it's got a vegetable mix on top of that. So without further ado, let's kind of just walk you through what the heck is this and how can I make it at home if you so desire. So this is the start of our Philadelphia roast pork sandwich. And basically what you're looking at here is I went out and I actually bought a kind of a large Boston butt. You're really looking for 3 pounds or so. You could go bigger. I ended up cutting this off of the bone. There's about another half of the butt that I bought that I'm not using. And that's mainly because I want the rub to coat all the surfaces, and it was just so massive. I didn't think that it was going to work very well. So again, I've got about a 3 pound. After I cut it down, you can buy 3 pound pork roast. about a 3-pound roast here. And what I've done is I've taken a mix of fresh garlic, minced up fresh garlic, salt, kosher salt, black pepper, some red pepper flakes, and then you can see I've got a pretty good generous amount of fresh thyme, which I've kind of chopped up, and fresh rosemary, which is kind of that's the dominating smell in here right now, is that fresh rosemary, which I took it off the stem, and then I used kitchen shears to kind of dice it up in smaller pieces. So again, pork roast, about a 3-pounder. I've added kind of a dry rub. I'm going to dry brine it overnight with that minced garlic, my kosher salt, my black pepper, my red chili flakes, and fresh thyme and fresh rosemary. And we'll see how it comes out. But we'll pull this out tomorrow. You could, I guess, ideally dry brine it maybe for a full 24 hours. I just don't have time to do that. So we will pull this out in the morning, and then we'll commence with the rest of the preparation. Well, I do like big butts, and I cannot lie. Don't get too big of a butt, though. I actually bought a 10-pound. Wasn't really paying attention at the grocery. Bought a big Boston butt that was 10 pounds. And I get confused with like pork shoulder, Boston butt, picnic, all of that stuff. You just need a pork roast that is relatively small, 2 to 3 pounds. I ended up hacking mine in half because there was no way that big old thing was going to fit into my Dutch oven, and it worked out fine. But you want about a 3-pounder. So let's talk next about through the magic of technology. We're going to fast forward to this morning and see what we do next with our big hunk of pork. So it's the next morning, and we've had this roast pork. We've had it dry brining for about 12 hours, a little more than that. 24 hours would be even better. One of the things I did is I trussed it up with some twine because we don't want this pork roast falling apart during the cook. We're going to eventually slice it, so we want it to be nice and compact and all in one piece so that we can easily slice it or attempt to easily slice it. The other thing I've done is added a in-roast thermometer so that we can track the internal temperature. Our goal is 180, and then we will pull it out and rest it. But one of the interesting things about the Philadelphia pork roast sandwich is that we're not going to roast this pork, which sounds kind of crazy. I would love to throw it on the smoker, but it's not how it's done. We're going to braise it, and that is accomplished by putting it in a Dutch oven, putting some liquid in there, which we'll get to in a minute, and then cooking it with the cover on in that liquid. And the reason we're going to braise it is because the liquid is going to become our au juice that we ladle over the finished sandwiches at the end. Or if you wanted to, you could dip your sandwich in the au juice. But we want to make that really great juice. So to do that, we're going to be cooking this in a Dutch oven with the cover on with some liquid in it. So what I've done this morning, in addition to trussing up my meat, is I've sliced up very thinly as I could. I've sliced up a whole onion, and I am cooking it about done till it's translucent in some olive oil. And I'm going to turn this off for the moment. This is about where I want it to be. And then the next step is going to be adding that pork roast to our Dutch oven here. And it is a little bit of a tight squeeze, and that's the other reason why, unless you have an enormous Dutch oven, you want to be careful how big of a roast you get, because you may not be able to fit it in there. Now, the recipe calls for it to be fat side up. Sometimes these Boston butts or pork roasts have a big fat cap, and you could certainly trim that down if you wanted to. I'm just getting the remainder of my brine rub on the roast. There's no reason for it to go to waste. But anyway, the recipe calls for you to, if it's got a big fat cap, to trim it down a little bit and then score it. You know, kind of do a checkerboard pattern about an inch deep into it, and that will help, you know, break that fat cap down. But I just wouldn't, I wouldn't have a big old fat cap on your roast, because it's not like it's gonna be on the smoker for 12 hours where that's all gonna melt away. You want a fairly thin fat cap on this. And then the last thing I'm gonna do, I've got my onions in there, I've got my pork roast in there. I'm gonna take about 2 cups of unsalted chicken stock and add that to the mix. I think I may have mentioned that ideally you would use pork stock, but who the hell has pork stock? If you happen to have access to pork stock, then you can certainly use that. I don't know where I would find it. I'm sure you can order it online, but I don't have any access to that. So we're using unsalted chicken stock, and that's going to work just fine. So onions, chicken stock, our dry brined pork butt, and all trussed up with a temperature probe in it. And I'm going to put the cover on my Dutch oven, and that's going to go into the Dutch oven at 325 for at least a couple of hours until we get to 180, and then we'll pull it out and rest it. And again, the reason we want that 180 is we don't want it so overcooked that it falls apart and we can't slice it, but we also want to make sure the pork is done. So we will check back in a couple of hours on our non-roasted pork roast. So not everyone has a Dutch oven. If you don't have a Dutch oven, don't worry about it. You got a stock pot. Anything that you can put in the oven with a cover on it will work fine. But I think a Dutch oven is ideal. So we talked before about not only is there roast or braised pork in our Philadelphia roast pork sandwich, but there is a vegetable component. So let's get into what that's all about. All right, while we continue to braise our pork in our Dutch oven, I'm preparing another component of the Philadelphia roast pork sandwich, which is a layer of greens, of really well-cooked greens. Now, the traditional recipes call for a vegetable called broccoli rabe, R-A-B-E, which is a very bitter green. I could not find broccoli rabe. Every once in a while, I'll see it in a grocery here in North Carolina, but I was not able to find it. So we're being creative, and I did buy some broccolini, which is kind of like a broccoli, but it is much kind of limper. It'll cook down a lot more than broccoli would. I also am adding some kale, which is going to give it some bitterness. And I had some arugula in the refrigerator, which is another bitter green, and I added that to the mix as well. This looks like a ton of greens, but it will cook down. I've got my stock pot here with some browned garlic chopped up with some olive oil. And one thing that the recipe did not call for that I'm going to add, because I love collard greens, I make a mean batch of collard greens being down here and from the South. And the way that we cook collard greens is we use ham hocks. So I scored a couple of ham hocks, and we're going to put those into the mix. And again, that's pork, so it's going to blend nicely with the flavors of the rest of the sandwich. And then I'm just going to add my greens. And again, these will cook down considerably, so it won't be nearly as much once we're done cooking. Once I've got all of my greens in there, which I've almost accomplished, I'm going to add a few other elements. I've got some kosher salt and pepper here. I'm going to add that to the mix. I've got some crushed red pepper flakes. I'm going to add that in. I'm going to add a splash of chicken stock. If I really wanted to be fancy, I could go break into my Dutch oven and get some of that stock out of the Dutch oven. But I'm just going to add, I'm probably adding like half a cup of chicken stock here, just to make sure there's enough moisture in there. And then the final thing I'm going to add is one of the stars of this dish, and that is a pepper called long hots. And I've never heard of long hots before, but apparently they are an Italian pepper. You can just put them on as you assemble the sandwich as whole peppers, but I'm going to go ahead and incorporate it into the dish. I ordered these on Amazon. I couldn't find them in the grocery, but again, they're called long hots. They're an Italian red pepper, and I will tell you, I've minced them up. I've got about a cup worth of long hots in here, seeds and all. And let me tell you, they are pretty intense. They are pretty intense. I don't know how my wife's going to do with this once it's all cooked down, but they are pretty, I won't say they're like incredibly hot, but they're definitely a little spicy. So I'm going to go ahead and crank the heat up on this, and then we will let it simmer. The recipe calls for cooking it for like 10 or 15 minutes, but we want this stuff limp. We want it like basically overcooked beyond belief, so that it will sit nicely on the sandwich. We don't want any crunch or anything like that when we're assembling our sandwich. So I'm going to go ahead and put the lid on this, crank up the heat, get it boiling a little bit, and then I'll lower the heat and simmer it for about half an hour or so. And then we'll come back. So if you don't have broccoli rabe, don't worry about it. You could substitute like I did. Mustard greens, turnip greens would work. I was really tempted to go with collards. I really was, but collards, that would totally change the recipe because they just have such a distinctive texture and flavor, but I do love them. So yeah, be creative if you can't find broccoli rabe, and it'll work out just fine. I probably cooked those greens for 45 minutes at like a pretty good simmer, and then I just turned them down to the lowest setting and let them sit for a couple of hours actually while I worked on everything else. So let's get on to checking where we're at with our braised pork. So just to recap, we took our roast and braised it in the oven at 325 for 2 hours. It wasn't quite where I wanted it to be after 2 hours, so I did jack it up to about 375 and left it in there for almost one more hour until I got it up to an internal temperature of about 180 or just shy of 180. Again, you don't have to cook it to that high of an inner temperature, but 155 that's kind of the accepted safe mark for pork. And I think the reason we're taking it to 180 is so that it will slice more easily but not fall apart. So we'll see how that works out, because I do have a slicer a deli slicer that we'll be using later on to slice the meat, and we'll see how that works out. Hopefully we got the temperature right. But the next step, let's take a look at this. This is what the roast looks like. It smells fantastic, by the way. We got some nice au juice there. I'm going to pull it out once I'm off camera here. I'll put it in a double wrap it in some heavy duty foil, and I'll probably throw a blanket around it and let it rest for 1 hour. Resting meat is always a good idea. And so we'll do that. And then after we rest it for an hour, I'm going to put it into my refrigerator and let it sit there for about an hour to cool down a little bit, and so that it slices just a little bit easier. So we'll get this wrapped and resting, and then we'll come back when we're ready to slice us some roast pork. Yeah, I was a little worried about how the roast pork would come out in terms of being able to slice it, because nine times out of 10, if I'm cooking pork, I'm doing like pulled pork where I want it to fall off the bone and shred, and I could never slice like a pork butt that I did for pulled pork. But 180, that came out perfectly. I had no problem slicing, which you'll see in just a second here. So if you just kind of follow my guidance, or go to Serious Eats where I found this recipe, a pretty detailed recipe. Just follow the instructions and you'll do fine. I did not really chill the roast as much as I thought I would need to. After about an hour in a very cold refrigerator, maybe 2 hours, it was kind of room temperature at that point. It had cooled off enough to handle it, and that's really all I needed. So let's take a look at what this looks like as we slice up that braised pork.
So we have rested and chilled a little bit our braised pork, and I went ahead and cut it in half just so it would be easier to slice. So I'm going to go ahead, and it's going to get really noisy here when I start slicing this, so I will just do a few slices so you can kind of see how it looks, and then we'll move on with slicing the rest of it. And I've used this slicer 2 or 3 times. It's kind of a nice tool to have. You either have one or you don't, right? So here we go. So I'm going to hold up right there, and let's see how our pork is coming out. It looks like it's coming out great. So not too thin, but it's definitely holding together. So that looks fantastic. So I will free up my hands and slice the rest of this, but that is what our braised pork looks like once we started slicing it.
So I apologize for the shoddy camera work, but you can imagine doing all the stuff I'm doing with an iPhone in one hand and using your other hand to operate machinery and mix stuff and move stuff. It's sometimes I force my wife into service as an extra set of hands, but she's at work today, so I had to go it alone. So I apologize for the thumb in the picture or the shaky camera work, but we're going to get it done one way or the other. So I'll just show you quickly what a 2 to 3 pound roast, how much pork that ends up producing.
So we have sliced our whole 3 pounds of braised pork roast, and let me tell you, this stuff is pretty good. Can't wait to try it on the sandwich.
So that was a large plate. That I could easily probably make 10 or 12 sandwiches with easily with that 2 to 3 pound pork. So that's kind of what you would need if you were having a get together. So it's time, man. Let's assemble our sandwiches and see how they came out.
Okay, people, after a ton of work, we are ready to assemble our Philadelphia roast pork sandwich. What I did in the meantime off camera was I took some hard bread, and it needs to be hard because we're going to be putting some of that au juice on there. We don't want it to be a big mushy mess. I put provolone on the bottom, a healthy amount of provolone, put it under the toaster. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our roast pork on. And you'll have to pardon me because I am going to use my fingers, which are clean. I wouldn't assemble yours with my fingers, but we're going to grab a good amount of this pork and get it on there. It is not easy to film yourself and cook at the same time. You probably figured out that my cinematography needs some work. All right, so we've got our pork on there. I'm going to put a little bit of au juice on our pork. This stuff came out really good. Just super tasty with all that pork flavor and a little bit of onions in there. So we'll just put a little bit of that au juice on there. And then the next thing we're gonna add is our green mix. And again, this is supposed to be broccoli rabe, but we improvised. It's got those long chilies in it. We're gonna put a healthy dose of that on each of these. And you can see this is probably not the neatest sandwich you're ever gonna eat. A little bit more on the other one, because that's the one I'm gonna dive into here in a second. All right, and then this is what's formerly known as the moment of truth. We're gonna put our other piece of the bread on there. And I am going to put my phone down for just a second while I take a big bite so I can report back. That is outrageously good. I mean, you've got the pork, you've got that provolone cheese, the long chilies add like a real zip to it, along with the broccoli rabe, the artificially created broccoli rabe. And then that au juice is just insane. I would eat this anytime I had the chance. So there you have it. That's our Philly roast pork sandwich, North Carolina style. Hope you enjoyed it. I know I'm gonna enjoy it.
So my mama always told me, don't talk with your mouth full, but I did anyway. I wasn't, honestly, before I started this edition, I wasn't sure how the vegetable mix would work with it. I was a little skeptical, but the combination of that melted provolone and the roast pork, that juicy roast pork, and the au juice, and then that really flavorful vegetable mix on top, it is off the charts good. And I've talked to people before who are like, you know, Philly cheesesteak's pretty good, but you got to try a roast pork sandwich. And I see why they say that now, and I see why it's the roast pork sandwich in Philadelphia that people really love versus maybe the cheesesteak in a lot of cases. So I hope you enjoyed our edition of Opposing Delicacy, our NFC Championship edition of Opposing Delicacies. Remember, come visit us at bgobsession.com, the best fan forum for Washington fans anywhere on the web. We've been at it since 2009. We know what we're doing. We're very friendly. Our community is very diverse, very welcoming. We have a lot of fun. I have lifelong friends that I have made on BGO. We just have a really good thing going. I wanted to issue a special invite. You know, the team's official message board, Extreme Skins, recently was shut down for reasons I don't know, and it doesn't matter. But we've already welcomed a ton of Extreme Skins fans to BGO. And you may not know this, but the owners and the founding members, of which I am one, we were original owners and staff of the original Extreme Skins before the team acquired the site. So we know what a great site that was, especially early on, because we helped build the place. And we modeled a lot of BGO after the early Extreme Skins site. So come on over. We've got a ton of former ESers on BGO. They're loving it, and I think you would love it too. And we certainly invite you to join us. Listen to our BGO Blind Pig podcast. It's typically on Monday nights after big games, and it will be this week. I hope that we will be celebrating a massive win and what could be our first Super Bowl appearance in a long, long time. So until then, I hope you have a great experience watching the game. Come on by, register on bgobsession.com. It's free. Join our game day chat, and we'll have a blast together. Have a great one.